Hi, it's Elise Owl. Today we are chatting with Grad. Rob is an artist based in Los Angeles. Rob, I know you're also, though, a talented musician and writer as well. So that's a treat to have all three in one artist. I'm sure that actually a lot of our community members are already familiar with your work. You have a pretty prolific career going. But can you share your story for those who might be unfamiliar with your practice?
Sure. So thank you. It's really great to be here, by the way. Great to be part of all of this. But I did start out as a musician originally, 35 years ago, whatever the hell it was. I was a kid, and I happened to get into a neighborhood band because I just wanted to play and be with the guys and hang out. And I loved it, and we got pretty good. And then we got a big record deal, and then we went on the road. Like it just kind of, it just sort of happened. And we got about as far as you can get without in the music business without going really famous, right? So we got the record deal, we were on MTV, we went on the road for a while, and it was wonderful until it wasn't, because we were young and stupid, and we made it, just thing fell apart eventually. So I had always been fascinated by visual art. When we were on the road, I would go to museums when the guys went to the malls or, whatever it was. So it was always kind of on my mind. And later I started getting into visual work while I was still doing music professionally. And I started by, making CD covers and things. But the epiphany happened when I was doing music for music supervisors at the time in the 90s. And back then they would have desks piled with CDs. And you were always trying to get your CD to have impact, so they would listen to your music to try and get in a show. And I came up with this idea to print on a transparency that we would use for an overhead projector and then slide a piece of sandpaper or fabric behind it into the jewel case. And I started getting calls about these CDs. And there was a point where I sort of had an epiphany. I'll never forget it. I'm standing in front of a Robert Rauschenberg painting in Madrid. I'm on this life sojourn solo trip to Europe, and I'm standing in front of this painting. And then it was, it's called The Express, and I think it was late 50s, early 60s, and he was doing the emulsion on the silk screens. And I realized that what I was doing with the CDs, with the photography, with things going on around it, was kind of like a modern adaptation of that. So that's when I started. And I made two pieces, and I got a show immediately, and didn't even know what I was doing, and was terrified, and was totally over my head. But I pulled it off, and I loved it, and that was about 10 years ago. And I just kind of started focusing more and more on visuals, and that's what I do now.
Yeah, I'm curious about how your career has evolved from that point. So how do you go from work in the music industry effectively, so working on the CDs, to where you're at today in your career?
It was a process, because like I said, I got a little bit lucky up front. I just kind of spilled some wine on some canvases, and I printed on plexiglass, and I brought them to a friend of mine. Her older sister, actually her younger sister, owned a little gallery space in West LA. And so I just went to show them to her to see, hey, are these good? Are they not? I don't even know. I like them, and she's like, oh my God, they're wonderful. So I got a little lucky out of the gate. But once I decided I was going to, loved it. And, I sold that night and everything. So there was something that was there for me. And I really enjoyed that visual work. You can it's like a new language, right? Music is one language and speaking a different language. And you can say different things in visuals. And I just loved it. But I knew I'd need to do my homework because I didn't know what I was doing. So I found a mentor, and I was doing design work for years. So, it's one of those things it's your experiences a lot of times. I can speak for myself. A lot of times I don't know what I'm doing or why I'm doing it, or I'll curse the universe for God damn it, I hate this job. Why am I doing it? Whatever it is, right? And then years later, something happens and that skill comes in handy. And that's sort of what happened here. I was comfortable making things work in a finite space because I'd already been doing it, so it was just like learning to adapt that. So I actually got a mentor, a woman who was the head of the photography department in a college nearby. And she became a friend of mine, and she started teaching me things. So I did a little bit backwards. So I knew that if I was really going to do this seriously and really wanted to be taken seriously and really wanted to contribute artistically, that I was going to need to figure that out. So it's evolved from there. I will say that music does play, or that history in music does play an essential role in what I do. Everything I do has layers in it. right? And there are all these like moving shapes, and there's a lot of performance in my work because I'm spilling out handmade shapes and things, and then using those to create these cropped kind of things. And and the layering and everything, very similar to music, right? You get all the instruments together in a song, you do a recording, you've got drums, you've got keyboards, all the pieces have to work together. And I think like that, and that's how it plays itself out in my visual work.
Is that how music weaves into your work, or is there even additional inspiration? I know you're also into poetry. How is that woven into the pieces of fine art that you're creating?
Again, the skills are never lost, right? So I spent God knows how many years writing lyrics. And so I write. And so it's just kind of always something I do. Now I do incorporate text into a lot of the work, but I think in terms of phrases. And so I use the term poetry a little loosely with me, because I don't really consider myself, and maybe this is wrong with me, but I don't, I'm not like a huge advocate of poetry, but I do think in terms of phrases, and I do write these things. I was a big fan of Charles Bukowski, but his poetry was very just conversational, and that is how mine is. But I do incorporate the words in some of the lines, and I'm even doing work now that has full verses in them in various ways and so forth. So it's totally, everything is completely intertwined at this point.
Yeah, I'm curious about what you are actually working on right now. Can you share more about your current body of work?
So yeah, I've as of the last 6 months or so of last year, I made a ton of art. Like I was just cranking it out. You go through these ebbs and flows, and then this year started, 2020, and I just took a breath. I had a big museum show the end of last year and everything. I was really, I made my first giant mural piece and everything. So I needed a breath. And then, the coronavirus comes along, and, we've all been on lockdown. And I've really been enjoying this time in a way because it's given me the opportunity to just kind of get back to here. So I haven't been making a ton of work. I've just a few things. I have a couple commissions in, so I've been working on those. And I've been working on a poetry book that will have visuals in it. That'll probably be out in a couple months. I think what I am working on right now is incorporating the words and the text more into the work, even more so than I was doing before. Before you'd see a word or a couple lines or something. And what I'm doing now is really kind of going more into that. I really, a lot of my work sort of maps my internal world. Like I like to paint things that we can't see, but I use the external world to explain that. And like in vignettes and personifying that experience. So the words lend themselves to that. And that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Has the current health crisis impacted your work? Because this seems like a body of work that you started before shelter in place. Have you seen it be impacted by this current environment in any way?
100%. Because I've really been spending this time, for me, has been a gift, because I had so many deadlines and that I'm grateful for. It's all really good. But I am grateful to have had this moment to kind of sit back. And what I've really been thinking about is, why do I make my art? How did I really get started? What really, what do I really want to do with this? Is it really just about meeting the deadlines and making really cool stuff? Or, which has never just been about that for me. So I've always been wanting to contribute to something bigger than me, bigger in time and in space and everything. So I've really been spending time thinking about that. And I can't tell you yet exactly how that's going to translate into visual, because it's still sort of germinating, but it absolutely will. I think it's going to have a huge effect on what I make next.
What do you think about the future of the art world, how it might be impacted by this? It seems like you anticipate an impact on your own personal practice. Do you anticipate changes in the broader art world as well?
I absolutely think so. I live in a whole community of artists. I have so many friends who are artists and stuff, and everybody's going through their own version of what I just said, kind of reassessing, what our role is and what we're here to do and why we got into it in the first place. And, I have some friends who are just cranking stuff out, because that's what they do. And other people who have been more like me and a little more introspective about it for now. But I think, just with art fairs and consultants, like everything is going to change now, right? Because I think that there will be an element that will go back, but it's going to be changed, right? This experience will somehow, I think the technology is amazing. The fact that we can do this right now, why, when the world opens up, would we not do this more? We live in different cities. You know what I'm saying? Like that kind of thing that no one was really doing before, too much at least. So I do think it's going to be impacted. I think the online thing is going to become even bigger than it has been. Everyone's exploring now. How do I show work? How do I make it more experiential online so you don't have to be there? All that kind of stuff. Having said that, though, there's no replacement for being in the room with a piece of artwork. So that's not going to go away either. And we're all looking forward to having that opportunity again. So, I think it's some of both.
I completely agree with you. I mean, I think that it has opened up the eyes of institutions that haven't been as open to virtual sharing of work to ways that they can actually effectively do that. But it is still important. We actually touched on this in the last conversation that I had with an artist. You brought up the same point that there is no comparison to actually seeing a piece with your own two eyes. I think you need a space for both. Well, we are actually in your studio, and I'd love to take advantage of the opportunity to see some of the work that you have, maybe in greater detail, and show us around the space that you create.
See if I can do this without making everybody crazy. This is one of my newer pieces. And so you can see this picture, I believe, is on the website. But so when you go in, this is the part that you can't really see from the pictures, right? So it's all dimensional. These are the layers I was talking about. And we were talking about the words. So here's a poem that I wrote that's on this piece. And it's about, says no longer waiting on the sidelines, waiting to get sent in. To hell with waiting games and setting up camp on the sidelines, waiting to get sent in. I'm going in. So, it's sort of a, inspirational thing. So, and then here's another one that's, you can see again that everything is layered.
Yeah.
Right? So it's all three-dimensional. And then the background is like a matte aluminum, and I've got plexiglass in the front. So
what is the process for creating work? So speaking of the piece with the poem embedded inside, did it start with the poem, or did it start with a piece and you layered the written text on top?
So I'm in my book, I'm actually working with trying to write the poetry first, and it's been super hard so far. Easier to write the piece first, or to make the piece first, or at least get it partially. So the process on something like this is all of the shapes that are showed you there are hand painted. So I'll hand paint shapes just on black on white paper like this kind of thing, right? So they're very sort of Rorschach-y looking to begin with. And I'll do a number of those, and then I will photograph those and use the outlines, and that's how I cut the pieces. And then I will crop photos, or I'll paint on them, or whatever that is. And I usually use plexiglass or aluminum, that kind of thing. So the process is kind of like music, like I said, finding the shapes that work together, that are sort of expressing what I want. And then from there, I start working with colors and photographs and painting and words. Those kinds of things come in after I have the shapes. It's always the shapes first.
Do you work on multiple pieces at one time, where you're maybe creating shapes and you're layering them together and figuring out what's working for one composition and realizing that this shape might work for another, or are you typically focused on a single piece?
No, that's exactly it. I'll do a lot of shapes, sometimes. And a lot of times I, even if I'm working on one piece, I'll make more shapes than that piece is asking for, because they're not all right. And a lot of times the ones that I am not using for that get used for something else eventually. Like I have sort of a library of shapes that I have, and once they're used, I don't use them again. So each piece, pretty much, those shapes, 99% of the time don't get used again. But I do have a library of them. And so sometimes I will be like, I know what it needs, and then I'll kind of bring it in. So it's a little bit of both, but especially when I have deadlines for a show or something, I tend to make everything all at once. It's a little chaotic, but it's all right.
I'm sure. Like, how many pieces do you typically work on at once, especially if you're talking about maybe building a show? Is it like 8 pieces at one time, or is it,
8 to 12 probably for a show. And it's usually what it is I'll have 1 or 2 up. Usually they're my scouts, they're like the 2 ants that go out to find the food first, and then they come back and tell everybody else, and like, come on, that's sort of I usually, because I experiment a lot, right? A lot of my work is just from experimenting. So I'll experiment, and then if I get a couple of hits on something, like that's good, you know, then I will. If I feel like the idea is worthy, then I'll build a series around it. And the challenge is always to beat the first one. And it
Yep.
doesn't always happen.
Yep. So you're kind of releasing a few into the world, seeing what the reaction response is.
Sometimes I'll post on Instagram. Sometimes I don't ask anybody. I just know. It depends. But yes, there's always like the first one or two as I'm just kind of messing around, and then I strike gold. Like, oh, and then I kind of get excited and work from that.
Yeah. What has been your experience of interacting with the art world? Are they receptive to the range of creativity, or have they tried to maybe more traditional art world? Have they tried to funnel you down a specific path?
I think most everyone I've worked with is very um, open and accepting of kind of who I am, what I do, and everything. Like very supportive, I guess is a better word. Having said that, galleries and stuff. I mean, they want to sell artwork, right? And I have been primarily focused on the visual work for quite some time. It's only been recently, I would say, within the past year, that I really kind of feel like I've started opening that up again, because I knew that, like I said, if I'm going to do this, I got to do it right, and I really got to. So I have been mostly focused on the visual for a long time. It's only been the last year, so I was like, as I'm doing more writing and I'm getting, I keep a blog and stuff, and people have been writing in about the blog saying, oh, I love this or whatever. I'm like, oh, so that's more of a recent thing that I'm really kind of being more integral.
So you have gradually built your career over time, and you mentioned that you did things backwards in a sense where you explored fine art, visual art a little bit later in your career, and then you
Yeah.
worked to obtain mentorship and hone your skill set that way. What are your thoughts on sort of the merits of a more traditional background, maybe going and getting a bachelor's or a master's in fine arts versus taking a self-taught approach?
Like anything in life, there's pros and cons. And for music, this was the same way. I so pros and cons. Because I have a ton of friends that have done both and are successful doing both. So there's no one way to go about it. I think they did say, though, there's some statistic. I think that 90% or something of all the jobs in the art world includes, not just including artists, but people have MFAs. So that to be someone who's either self-taught or taught kind of on your own terms, it's a smaller window probably. But I really think that isn't. And there is a sense that there is a certain part of the art world, I think, that does look upon the MFAs and things, and values that very much. My experience is, if you get an education in art, in order to be a truly original thinker, it takes a lot of effort, because we get taught in school all the stuff to do. And to really break out of that, not everybody can do. You can become a very skilled craftsperson and a great artist, but to really make something that people go like, what's that? That kind of thing. I think that a lot of times the rules are given, very strictly. And so it can be hard to break out of that. People who are self-taught tend to do that naturally because we don't know any better, right? So we're out there, throwing something out. But the downside to that is you can get lucky, maybe do one or two cool things, but not really know what you're doing. And I don't know that a lot of people ever put the effort in to really learn enough to make a career out of it when they're on their own. So, I have this part of me sometimes wishes that I had gone to more traditional schooling, and part of me is really glad that I didn't. So I kind of have a mixed feeling about it, and I really think it's case by case and who the person is and what your work is. This has worked for me, but I've done the work outside, because I knew that if I really wanted a career in this, and I love it that much that I'd want a career in it, because not everybody does, you can love to do it and not want to try and make a career out of it. But I knew that I had work to do. So I'm kind of on both sides of that fence. I see the pros and cons, and I just happened to get a record deal before I even graduated college. And who doesn't want to go pursue that? You know what I mean? Like RCA Records signed us. I'm going, so that's sort of how it worked for me.
Do you have any advice that you would give to artists as they are building their career? So, emerging artists that are interested in actually giving it a go and trying to build a real fine art career, what would you say to them?
If they want a career in fine art, as you're saying, um, first thing I would say is at the end of the day, it's all about the work. And that work is communication. Artwork is communication. You are communicating something to somebody. You may not know them, and they may live God knows where, but it's speaking something. And if your work, if you want a career, your work has to connect. Um, that's the first thing. If you just want to make work to feel good about it and have it be cathartic or whatever, that's totally awesome. But it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a career, right? Number two, career is about relationships. Everything good that's happened for me has because I met someone who met someone or knew something or whatever, and that's how it happened, right? So, but they had to, so, but the work had to be there. Because at the end of the day, if someone really likes you and they give you an opportunity, at the end of the day, they're just going to be looking at, that opportunity, they're going to be looking at the work. So it's got to be the work really has to communicate something and be new in some way. Even if you're a painter, it just has to be fresh, right? And then number two, it's all about relationships. So treat people right, be, it's super important because if those are the two things I would say.